Welcome everyone to our web conference today, Pivots in Prevention, College Campus Sexual Violence Prevention and COVID-19. My name is Tori Vandelin with Prevent Connect and Valor US. Prevent Connect is a national project of Valor US, formerly known as the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the US government, CDC, or Valor. When folks went to register, you noticed that we had a handful of objectives today. Those include describing the impact and context of COVID-19 on campus sexual violence prevention programs. They also included identifying opportunities for innovative on and off-campus partnerships. And then we want folks to be able to discuss the possibilities of community-engaged prevention on college campuses. As folks who are familiar with Prevent Connect know, is that we love to have plenty of resources for our colleagues on campuses. So Ashley will be pasting links in the chat to these resources. Most recently, was that last week? I don't know what day of October this is. It's been a really quick month. So last month at the end of September, we hosted a conversation with Doctors Jennifer Hirsch and Seamus Khan, who are the authors of Sexual Citizens. And they provided a really great overview of what their research showed about preventing violence on campuses. A little while ago, we had another web conference on enhancing campus sexual assault prevention efforts through situational interventions and some of that emerging research. And then we also did a podcast series with the folks at NASPA who worked on this Expanding the Frame report, institutional responses to students accused of sexual misconduct. We recently had a town hall about preventing sexual violence during COVID. What have folks done? And we did that close to the 1-year mark of the pandemic and featured campus practitioners on that web conference. And then finally, as part of our web conference series with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center about sexual violence prevention during COVID-19, one of the web conferences in that series was about adapting sexual violence prevention curriculum, and we had folks who create and provide assistance on curriculum on college campuses. The folks from Bringing in the Bystander were featured on that web conference. So encourage folks to check out those resources when they can. And the other part of the focus of this web conference today is things that folks have done in light of the COVID-19 pandemic to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence. So we do encourage folks to check out the recordings from our series in partnership with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, Sexual Violence Prevention During the COVID-19 Pandemic, Adapting in an Ever-Changing Landscape. That series was a 6-part series, and all the recordings are available on both our website and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center's website. And we know that this has been a particularly challenging time for campuses, and really wanted to highlight kind of some of the ways that we are thinking about sexual violence on campus here at Prevent Connect. I know that we've heard from folks since the beginning of the pandemic that people working outside of prevention or outside of survivor response are often conflating the idea of, because we have social distancing, do we really have sex and assault happening at the same time? And so when this National College Student COVID-19 Impact Survey came out, we thought that this was a great opportunity to talk about violence and its prevention from a shared risk and protective factor point of view. Because if this is what folks on campuses who aren't in prevention or response are thinking of, they're thinking of the anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts and behavior, substance use, and financial stress of their students. We also recognize those as risk factors for violence. And that may be a great opportunity for folks to think a little bit differently about how they're communicating prevention, knowing that there's a lot of misinformation that folks working outside of our field seem to have around COVID and sexual and intimate partner violence. So we know that you all have been doing a lot of this in the last year and a half and beyond. So Ashley's pasted the text chat question into the text chat, and we'd love to hear from you. How would you describe your work to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence on campus prior to COVID-19 for folks who have been on campus before COVID-19? I remember my time on a campus, there were so much research, so many different evidence-based programs and great community-driven and community-formed programs going on to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence too. So I think a great place for us to start would for folks to kind of reflect back and see what they were doing. I see someone's reflecting that they did in-person meetings, which may or may not be occurring right now, but just want to encourage other folks to find that question in the text chat and let us know, how would you describe your work to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence on campus prior to COVID-19? As you marinate on that and paste that into the chat, thank you, Melissa, talking about tabling events, mobilizing students in the Student Life Center. And that Melissa had started listening sessions with the community college campus. That's great. We'd love to hear from folks some of the work that they were doing before the pandemic. As you all are responding in the chat, we'll revisit these a little bit later in the web conference, but I am so excited to introduce the two guests that you'll be hearing from a lot today. We have Havana Watkins and Mariana Matthews. And Ashley, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce our first guest.
Thank you, Tori. Yeah, it is my honor to introduce you all to our first guest, Havana Watkins. And just so you all know, I'm going to share a little bit about Havana. Havana joined MCADSV, which is the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, in 2020 in a newly created position, Partnership Development Coordinator. Havana is a native St. Louis, oh gosh, I don't know why I have a hard time with words today, but Havana is a native from St. Louis who has always been in the field of helping and started her professional career as an EMT before transitioning to working with survivors of sexual assault. And prior to joining the coalition, Havana served the St. Louis community for more than 6 years in the field of domestic and sexual violence advocacy. She worked at Life Source Consultants, first as the program director and later as the executive director. Additionally, she started a program called Angels of Empowerment that provides doula support and mentoring to teen mothers who are survivors of abuse. Havana and her husband have 4 kids, and she and her family enjoy traveling and trying local brunch spots. And now, Havana, I am hungry and want to know about the best brunch in St. Louis, but we'll save that for another conversation. I want to pass this over to you and ask you if you would talk with us a little bit about, prior to COVID-19, how was the coalition partnering with college campuses on prevention? And it is all yours.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate it. And I'm always up for some good food. So whenever you're in town, let's do it. So prior to COVID-19, we kind of have to go back and start. Like all things, they don't just start overnight, right? So the process really began a little earlier with kind of digging deep into what it is prevention was. So initially at the coalition, prevention work began with our members being invested in public policy implementation. So that started with Title IX. And then it just kind of grew from there. As things change, you have to change like your drive, what it is that you do, your mission and your values. So things began to shift. So we fast forward to 2015 and we created a state plan, for violence prevention. And this was a collaborative effort. As you all have mentioned so many times, you guys are collaborating with people who are presenting on Prevent Connect. We're always sharing resources. And in Missouri, we do the same thing, right? So Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. It's a state coalition. And we partnered and collaborated with the Department of Health and Senior Services, thanks to the support of the American Public Health Association and of course the CDC. And we were able to perform some action planning, right? Like, this is what we want to do. We want to end violence on campuses. However, what is it that we need to do? We've got to start somewhere. So we start with an action planning session, right? We find out our strengths, our weakness, our opportunities, and threats. And there was one thing that was certain with all of this: passion led us here. Everybody who was at the table wanted to do the same thing, wanted to end campus level violence, local violence against everyone, not just specific to college campuses, but we knew that this was something that was happening on the local level as well. So we based this work of models off toolkits already showing promising practices, even one from CalCASA, which was the former name of Valorous, right? So we use this time to figure out what it is that we needed to do as a statewide coalition, and partnering with Partners in Prevention, who is also a statewide coalition. So we have two statewide coalitions that are doing great things, but it made complete sense to try to get this model on a local level that we were able to do so that campuses could connect with local programs in case there were some kind of violence or anything that were happening on. And this coalition building with campuses was not only allowing campuses to understand our work on the state level, but able for them to engage and build alliances in their own communities. And it's also opened the opportunity for, excuse me, research and to strengthen those efforts to see what it is that was a strength, what was a weakness, and what was the opportunity for improvement. So this was just like an ongoing session that was going on. And each year we just continue to get better and then be able to build alliances with our campuses.
Havana, I've been following some of the work that you all have been doing around the state action planning, and it's been really inspiring to see the partnerships that you all have been able to develop. But I have to ask, how did COVID-19 impact that?
Oh my gosh, right? How long has it been? Like, we were trying to talk about like how long we've actually been remote earlier, and I've kind of lost track of time, but we were all forced to go to remote, right? Some programs were already using Zoom or Google platforms. We were already using Zoom a little bit, but not, as much as we do now. But it actually wasn't as bad because we were lucky enough that we were able to meet virtually with all of our partners. So nothing stopped. Like, we may have to shift, we may have to pivot, we may have to figure out if our camera is working, log out, log back in. It's just, thank you, 19 months it's been. Figure out what to do, right? But we were able to build even more meaningful relationships because it was virtual and it was easier to jump back on Zoom. And we also had continuous collaborative meetings during COVID of like, what is it that folks are doing? We can gain ideas from each other. How can we better support? Here's something else. So I think it really actually got us to be a little bit closer because we all were sharing the exact same thing at the same time, trying to figure out how to shift while all being stuck at home, but still wanted to provide the services that were needed. So it's just something that we had to do, but I can say that we did it well, and we had a really good time doing it and figuring out what to do.
That's great. So I'm wondering, I know that you have been engaged in a really exciting partnership and strategy to expand prevention practice and have kind of narrowed in on working with a community college. So I love to hear you share what a community health worker is and how this partnership came about, what it looks like, and just, like why community health workers as part of your prevention work?
Absolutely, I would love to share. So at this time of like pivoting because of COVID, we also had like a shift in our strategic plan at the coalition. So we wanted to implement more efforts towards health equity in campus work. And when thinking about this, we knew that most of our campus partners were four-year universities, and they already had things that were in place as far as bystander intervention programs of different kinds of curriculums they were already using. But as we were reflecting on this, I reflected on my own experience and my choice to attend a community college. Like, it was local, it was inexpensive, it just made sense to me. And while being a student on a community college at 18, 19 years old, I was a victim of violence, right? And really didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to find resources. I didn't know who was in my community. And not saying that they weren't available on campus, but it wasn't a conversation topic. It wasn't a conversation within my peers, within my circle. So you think about risk and protective factors like I'm 19 years old, a Black female, living in one of the worst areas of St. Louis, like hearing someone yelling and screaming and all of that, that wasn't anything new, right? That was common. So it wasn't a conversation of, if you're in a unhealthy relationship, this is what you have to do. And so as I think about like that toxic relationship in my community, like there really wasn't anything safe. You know, there wasn't anyone I felt comfortable going to because we weren't talking about it. So I had all of these risk factors, no protective factors. And that's why I really wanted to reflect on like my personal why of being what it was that I needed when I was younger. And I decided, why don't we even try to reach out to a community college and see what can be done to make sure that this is a protective factor and somewhere that's protective for commuter students, because a lot of people who go to community colleges do not live on campus. They live in the area. They're usually pretty local. So thinking about this, I go back to my team and we're talking about it. And we decided that a great approach to this would be a possible connection with the community health worker program. And just infusing prevention work into it, because this was an infrastructure that was already in place. It was established, it was trusted in the community, and it was backed up by the CDC. So our St. Louis Community College had the successful community health worker program that not only has graduated hundreds of students over the past few years, but they had an 83% job placement rate in St. Louis in the community. So they're going right back into the community that they're in, and they're sharing their knowledge and skills. And you know, these community health workers, they're at the health departments, they're at doctor's offices, they're at health clinics, birthing centers, wellness centers, public schools, just to name a few. So it made it really easy to work with them because they were trusted community members. They promoted healthy behaviors. They maintained improved individual and community health. They performed informal counselings, health screenings, and it just really made sense because these were people that were trusted in the community. They were local, and this was a program that was not very small. It's 16 to 18 weeks. 16 to 18 weeks, and it's maybe 30 people in the cohort. So it's very small and intimate, and they have to get to know people in the neighborhood. They have to build these resources. So we built a solid relationship with the lady who oversees the program. And actually St. Louis Community College actually piloted the first community health worker program, and then it expanded throughout the state. So the program was growing rapidly. It was doing very well. It was very successful. And they actually were starting to emphasize more education around gun violence and mental health, because that's a lot of the things that were happening in the St. Louis City area. And they understood like the barriers in the community, understood the underlying conditions. They knew that there were underlying conditions in these marginalized communities. So it really made sense to kind of have a conversation with them of why we're talking about prevention of gun violence, prevention of mental health, or interventions on mental health, to talk about prevention of domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and sexual violence. So I presented at one of the cohorts, and because they had a small section that they talked about domestic violence, but they didn't talk about prevention. So that was something that was a little bit different that I was talking about. So I presented to one of the cohorts, and everyone was really interested in learning more. They had so many more questions, instructors. I had got so many follow-up emails. So it's like, okay, this is something that this community is really needing and that they're yearning for. Ironically, a funding opportunity came up, and we were given the opportunity to create an intensive prevention training that would be qualified for continuing education credits for this certified community health worker program. So we decided to see if that was something that they were interested in. The community college was, and here we are. So we went on and we started creating a curriculum. Next slide, please.
Havana, sorry, I just want to pop in really quick because it's first of all, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about like your background and just your personal experience. I think that the fact that you knew you had to make a pivot, right? You knew you had to think of something else, and then you went back to like your experience and what you needed, and then built that relationship. I just think that's so inspiring. when we're thinking about like how to expand prevention and have prevention be really community centered. So I just want to thank you for that. And then I also wanted to say that I think a lot of times, especially with community colleges, when I say we, I mean like preventionists, we're trying to like create something new. And a lot of times that we run into a lot of barriers just because there's like not resources, there's not time, there's not the buy-in. And so I really love that you found a structure that was already in place that made sense to partner with. I think that's just such a lesson that we can all learn from. So I just wanted to point that out, that I really heard that. But I'd love for you to share more about the curriculum creation.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, I really, just to pivot off of that, just really quick. I'm really into building relationships and partnerships. And there was something that was put out by RSP, and it was talking about like, before you start a new partnership, you have to ask yourself these 6 questions, like who's asking for the partnership, does it make sense, and so on and so forth. I won't go into that, but basically it was just a perfect fit. Every collaboration isn't going to work, but this really was a perfect fit. And it was with someone that oversaw the program, who saw it as something that was a great need. So those relationships and building important relationships are very, very vital when it comes to doing something a little bit different and introducing something new. So anyway, I'll get back onto the subject and talk about the curriculum creation. So with this, we broke it down into 3 separate modules. We started with the bare basics, right? Like, you can't know where you're going unless you know where you come from, right? So let's talk about what domestic violence is. What is sexual violence, and health equity, and how does it intersect with all of this? Like, we know what health equity is, we know what domestic violence and sexual violence is, but what does that really mean? So I encourage you all, Ashley put it in the chat, to read like these back to the basics and a health equity approach. Like, these are really good models that you can kind of be able to see, because sometimes you hear it, but until you can actually see it in practice, it really doesn't make sense, which was something that was not an issue with community health workers, because they already saw that. They knew the inequities, they knew the social determinants of health, and they knew where things were lacking. And here I was presenting to 30 students that didn't even know where to look for a domestic or sexual violence center, didn't even know how to do any of these things. So it was really good to have like that foundational learning for the first module. And then next, on the second module, we used toolkits that were already evidence-based, right? Why recreate the wheel? Like STOP SV technical package and preventing IPV across the lifespan are really good examples that give you tangible explanations and further expand things that we learned in the first module. And it's evidence-based, and it actually gives you different examples of things that you can do in your community and what it would look like. NSVRC always has amazing visuals and frameworks, along with Futures Without Violence. And I really appreciated Futures Without Violence because it had specific resources for those that were in the health field. So we could give those examples and encourage the students to go look at everything on these different websites and these toolkits so that they can better understand it, but also understand it from a health perspective as well. And then our last module covers safety planning, conversation starters, and resources specific to St. Louis. So we've given them all of this information, and it's like brain overload. What do I do with it, right? So we were able to give them examples and a tool where they can do mock trials of doing safety planning with a client. What does that look like? They can look at those videos from Futures Without Violence to see how a good way to start these conversations, but also be inclusive and not try to put themselves and their feelings on them without making them uncomfortable as the person asking and as the person on the receiving end. Because I even had a student ask me, like, as a male and talking to a female that could possibly be in a domestic violence situation, like, is that weird? I'm like, no, you just have to get comfortable with it. People can read people. So if you're genuine, it doesn't matter who, if you're trying to help someone, they're going to look out of how you're asking, if you're genuinely asking. So it was really important that I included those different ways of talking, giving some examples, and excuse me, and also providing them with resources. So you got all this information, but again, these 30 students didn't know about any of these organizations because they weren't exposed to them. So we have this nice organization, this nice card that has all of the organizations in the area, and it goes from shelters to legal assistance, and it's very small. And it's essential because it's taken away those barriers from the community health worker and from the client that may possibly need these resources. They don't have to look it up. They don't have to Google. This is something that is very small that can be on the back of a name badge or even slipped into a shoe. It can be even enlarged and placed as a poster if you have your own office and clients are coming in. But a lot of times community health workers are actually going into the homes with clients. So this is something that was easy and accessible. So lastly, community health workers truly understand health equity, and they have their boots on the ground. They're right there. They were there during COVID, encouraging people in marginalized communities to get vaccinated, encouraging them to get enrolled in Medicare, Medicaid. Just like they were there. They understood and they know the disproportionate impact of COVID. They know the disproportionate impact of health inequities. And so, it was really important to partner with someone who really understood the health inequities and why this was important. And this group really does understand all of this. And, like I said, we're piloting this here in St. Louis with the community colleges here, but we hope to expand it to throughout the state with the other community health worker programs. Because what better way to continue our efforts than to continue locally on a statewide community college universities, like we can get the messaging across to everyone as we want to continue to move towards ending violence against women and children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Savannah. That was so fabulous to hear you share. I actually heard you talk about this in another meeting, and I just like your passion for it and your excitement for it was like contagious. And I knew like we need to hear more about this program. And I think that as preventionists are really starting to like operationalize a health equity approach, this is such a good example of advancing your violence prevention through a program that already exists to address health equity. And so it's such a cool, exciting program. So thank you so much, Savannah. I know we're going to bring you back in a little bit and hear more from you. But I think, kind of bouncing off this conversation around health equity, we'd really love to hear from our audience and ask you, how can a health equity approach to preventing sexual and intimate partner violence help you connect and expand your prevention work to community colleges? And community colleges, really are kind of these special institutions that are very different from four-year schools and just have so many like amazing opportunities because of those differences. And I know, Havana, we've talked about, I would not be here if it wasn't for community colleges. I credit them to everything about my life. So thank you so much. We want to hear from you all. I'm seeing, Havana, I'm seeing lots of reactions to your presentation. This is fabulous, wonderful, inspiring, amazing. So that's so great. We want to hear from you all. What do you think about a health equity approach and helping to connect and expand what you're already doing on a community college? So Tori, I think we'll come back and see what folks have to say, but I'm going to hand it over to you because we want to hear from our next guest.
Thanks, Ashley. And thank you so much, Havana, for all that you shared and just the incredible work that you do with bringing prevention and prevention training to community colleges. That's such a lasting impact on the communities that folks serve. It's really fascinating to hear about, and we're so glad to have you here today. It is my honor to introduce our next guest on today's web conference, Mariana Matthews. Mariana serves as the prevention manager for undergraduate programs at UC Berkeley and is a Reiki, aromatherapy, and sound healing practitioner. Previously, they oversaw the prevention, response, and compliance efforts for West Virginia University. In their free time, you can find them searching for the best Bay Area coffee or cycling a new trail with their son. Mariana, as you find Bay Area coffee places, feel free to send those to me in an email if you'd like. But I know that you have some other ways that you want to introduce yourself to the audience too. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you just to everyone who's joining and sharing this space, and for taking time out of your day to connect with Valor. Huvana, thank you so much for your presentation, and myself. We're continuing this collective prevention and healing journey, I think, together in this work. And I just want to appreciate and thank Valor for this space and beginning this presentation, recognizing the land that they're joining from and occupying. And as I join from the Bay Area, California, specifically Oakland, I want to take a moment and recognize that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Hoichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Cochincha, Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. We know that this land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people, and recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of the stolen land since the institution's founding in 1868. So consistent with our values of community and diversity, we do have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. And so by offering this land acknowledgement, we continue to affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold University of California, Berkeley, or UC Berkeley, more accountable to the needs of American Indian Indigenous peoples. So I just want to take a moment and thank that and maybe introduce where I'm representing from, which is the UC Berkeley Path to Care Center. If that sounds okay, Tori.
Yeah, of course. And in your introduction to Path to Care, can you tell us prior to COVID-19, how did UC Berkeley approach sexual and intimate partner violence prevention? And just how did the context of COVID-19 impact the work that you all are doing at UC Berkeley Path to Care?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so I'll start with introduction kind of a little to our centers and kind of get grounded into the work, because I see that we have a variety of practitioners from all different fields joining us. So as part of UC Berkeley's community, I represent the Path to Care Center. And of course, we not only recognize the land that I just introduced that I'm occupying, but we're working towards a campus community free of violence, and ensuring that that work that we're doing is grounded in social justice. This is for us an active and ongoing commitment and vision that, of course, will be realized when every member of our community is a beacon of support and respect for those around them. So for UC Berkeley, for those that may not be familiar, we are part of a system-wide California system schools that have care centers that are specifically designed to support survivors of sexual violence and partner violence and other forms of violence that occurs on or off our campus, and really gearing those students, staff, faculty members, community outside that may be impacted by our campus community, and as well as alumni, and gaining access to resources available on our campus. And so for UC Berkeley, our Path to Care Center, that I have an honor of representing today, really leads the efforts to transform our campus into that community that's free from violence. And when we do that through our acronym, Prevention, Advocacy, Training, and Healing, or PATH. So we really work to collaborate with our campus community in making social change with that goal of creating a culture and environment that we're all really aspiring to and deserving. And so what you're seeing here on the PowerPoint slide is kind of our center's 3 active areas. We have our survivor support team, which is really focused on secondary and tertiary prevention through advocacy, healing, training, and trauma-informed response coordination. This team of advocates staffs our 24-hour confidential care line, or our response line, and supports the ongoing response to violence on and off our campus. And then, of course, our primary prevention efforts that are led through our prevention team under Dr. Melissa Kwan, who's our Associate Director of Prevention for the Path to Care Center, really focuses on shifting positive social norms, really increasing positive knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors throughout our campus. And we're working to really inspire these agents of change throughout UC Berkeley community in this collective shared campus that we all want to see. And then this kind of third area of our center is this institutional improvements. We're really focused on breaking down systemic barriers, systems of oppression, and working with our campus community, our law enforcement, our response advocates, our core teams, our CCR teams, our OVW, our off-campus partners, such as Futures Without Violence. Let's see if they're here. Welcome today. And building trust and spaces for all of voices to be heard. So thank you for allowing me some space to introduce our center that may not be aware, and I'm grateful to share this time today. So I think next slide, it really answer the more of the question of prior to COVID-19, how did UC Berkeley approach SV and IPV prevention and kind of that impact? I want to just talk about some of the principles that guide our work at the center. So I think this is really important to explore that we're, just like Havana said, we're taking systems that are already in place, these evidence-based and research-informed approaches that are out there from our partners at Futures and national resources to utilize that in our SPSH prevention and response. We're really centering, of course, the academic and community knowledge of our campus and non-campus partners. Ensuring really that foundation and approach to SPSH prevention is trauma-informed, that it is survivor-centered, that it is grounded in anti-oppression work, which is our director, Mari Nuth Barisi, always says is deeply influenced by radical feminists of colors and those impacted most by violence. And so we're developing these comprehensive primary prevention programs that are stemmed in research and practices that are already established in the field. And we're enhancing these to really empower and inspire our agents of change, our students, our employees, our champions of prevention on campus. And our approach to this work is to really create innovative prevention efforts, right? We want to work with communities, for communities, and really infusing a culture of care, respect, affirmative consent, and respecting boundaries, as we all should learn. And these efforts are built upon the foundation of survivors, of activists, of volunteers, of academics and community members who, of course, have paved the way before us to continue to do this work. And then another principle I just want to briefly introduce that really guides the work that we do is a socio-ecological model, or the SEM. If you're not familiar, the SEM is a comprehensive public health approach our center utilizes that not only addresses an individual's risk and protective factors, as Havana, my colleague, mentioned, but also addresses the norms and beliefs, the physical environments, social and economic systems that create conditions that allow for the perpetration of sexual violence, sexual harassment, and other forms of harm. And so for us, the SEM really helps us effectively design these multidimensional prevention programs that support individuals, families, communities, and other systems in which we know violence is perpetrated, promoted, and inhibited. And with that, I'll go to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about our approach to prevention through this primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. And so we work to really integrate kind of a combination of cross-campus coordination and continuous communication. Just as my colleague Havana has said, it's really important to connect with communities. So we're focused on a lot of pushing positive social norms campaigns, working to now, back in this hybrid world, customize in-person interactive workshops and educational series that are focused on ensuring that prevention is at every table in conversation throughout our institution, regardless if that department is tasked with prevention and response or not. So prior to COVID impacts, we really created space in our budget for around 30 paid student employees and interns. And they were tasked with really developing and facilitating interactive workshops with our student communities. We really believe in the power of peer-to-peer education, peer-to-peer knowledge, peer-to-peer influence. And our PTC, or our Path to Care students, were dedicated to really facilitating these conversations around culture, cultivating a culture of respect, consent and boundaries, bystander intervention, recognizing power and privilege and power dynamics, responding with care and concern, and SPSH prevention with their peers. And prior to kind of COVID, we were operating as normal. There wasn't budgeting impact, and it was important to our center to continue to pay our students for their labor in this work, and to model a work environment as Path to Care that prioritizes self-care for our employees, student employees, and full-time employees, autonomy within the work, and independence and trust in the innovation of their work, supportive environments of coaching instead of negative feedback, positive feedback spaces, pay equity, and really that was just inviting to all individuals to work in for our center, but also more so just for prevention and response work. So we really focus heavily on recruitment, on training, building relationships with campus communities, and kind of that ongoing development of our employees and department offerings for professional development, specifically centered around the foundations of social justice and holistic well-being. We wanted to continue to kind of explore equitable opportunities in divisions of labor and how that impacts women, people of color, and other minoritized groups. We definitely were engaging with peers, faculty members, staff, students, alumni, mentor, community members about in which ways we could address bias and equity and oppression, and definitely exploring expectations for setting a new type of culture of respect and inclusivity where, we are eliminating behaviors around race and gender-based microaggressions and bullying. And it was important to us as a campus, and is important to ensure that there's like this collective community responsibility. So we were consulting, training, and supporting in collaboration with departments, academic departments, community partners on and off campus to think about and really strategize towards these welcoming spaces. And so what you're looking at here on the screen is some of those components that we utilize of using affirming language, promoting inclusivity, equity, and empowerment, to streamline kind of consistent, accurate, and supportive communication around resources and reporting options, so that no matter where a student or an individual may go on or off campus, they have the accurate resources available to them. And that we could stay kind of centered around kind of co-creating a social norms message or campaign to replace these unhealthy messages that students and our employees may be seeing on or off campus with healthy attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs from the time that an individual may start at Cal or UC Berkeley, from the time that they graduate and go into the professional work field. And so the next slide, we'll see kind of this really impactful image of the impacts of COVID-19. We all experience this in different ways, and it really not only challenged us as individuals or institutions or identities to really examine the way we offer prevention and response services, but it really forced us also to rethink the forms of harm in our communities face, the barriers present, ongoing for many, and the intersection of mental health and holistic well-being. Unfortunately, into the pandemic, that program I just mentioned, we had to furlough many of our student-led prevention services, so just around 20 to 30 students. Our student employment opportunities were impacted some of our innovative developments, and we really had to restructure and recenter to hold space for survivors. Our center employees and our campus community needed this space to heal, needed the space to process, needed the space to just be present and to navigate what was happening in the world. And as practitioners in this field, we can actually fail to hold space for our own self-care and respect our own work-life boundaries. So this time really forced us to challenge this kind of lacked practice in the leadership within our center, kind of recentered the importance of taking care of yourself, your family, your health, and your well-being. And for that, I'm definitely grateful for UC Berkeley. And then additionally, our students were experiencing kind of new forms of violence at the same time. They're experiencing restrictions on access to resources, safety, basic needs. So for many of our vulnerable groups at Berkeley, such as our first generation college students or students experiencing houselessness, returning home wasn't always positive or available. That added emotional stress and physical safety erupted on our campuses everywhere. And we really need to adapt our messaging as well as our offerings to support kind of this digital world that everyone was moving into. So COVID-19, I think, reminded us and amplified the many systemic inequalities that are hindering our Black and Brown communities, our Indigenous populations, our LGBTQIA, our disabled, our international, our houseless, our families, just from having access to basic needs and resources and safety. So we centered around this time on collaborating with campus and non-campus partners to to provide it and look at these basic needs, to offer them in communication, to make sure it was widely distributed, to offer access to technology needs for our students, make sure that anything that was coming out from the campus that we were ensuring and supporting that messaging and enhancing it from the prevention and SPSH supportive lens, and ensuring that confidential support resources were widely available to students regardless of their physical location. And then our kind of standard prevention workshops that we were kind of in this flow of doing, right? Like scheduling something, going and delivering the workshop, and these practices kind of pre-COVID, we really had to shift virtually quickly, right? How do we shift these important in-person sessions online and these educational moments? And so we thought about shifting it into the ways of conversation. So we started scheduling one-on-ones with student leaders. We reconnected and held some focus groups for students to kind of debrief and reflect with each other. And these virtual sessions, whether they were for individuals or community groups on campus, focused around safety, self-care, reflection, healing, kindness. What kind of material do you need? What kind of questions do you have? And then as we move through the pandemic and continual murders on our Black and Brown communities that were really brought to the surface, we really had to continue to examine the environments, both physical and social, and our relationship with law enforcement that both maybe contribute to or protect against violence for many of our communities. And so a lot of that relationship building internally with our campus partners as well as externally needed to happen. And then of course, as a team within the Path to Care Center, we really focused around our mission, vision, and values and kind of realigning with the needs of the communities to co-expand into the networks in this kind of COVID impacted world we were navigating. Are our resources updated? Where are we at with strategic planning? Or is this a time to really think about our prevention strategies and frameworks and the tools that we are utilizing to assist and serve the communities? And how can we enhance that? So we started looking in ways to get students involved, back involved with the efforts of our center, and to really reinforce the idea that students, if are given power, they can really contribute in powerful and meaningful ways to their respective communities, and it really broadens hope. And so that was a lot of our focus at that time.
Mariana, thank you so much for giving us such a detailed background of the work that you all were doing at UC Berkeley Path to Care before COVID, and kind of what the impact was on you all as staff, on your students in general, on your student staff, and kind of the ways that you all were very responsive to the needs of students and survivors and the needs of prevention in this time. So I heard a little bit of it in your introduction on this slide. One of the ways that you all pivoted your work at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic was to pivot and create innovative and new programs and expand campus partnerships. Can you talk us through some of these shifts?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an important question. I think on this slide, you'll see is a little bit of introduction to some of the peer-led components. But for this time, we really spent kind of reorganizing our center's budget, really strategically thinking about how do we center around our employees and our student paid positions throughout these difficult times, eliminating as much maybe material spending as possible for swags and giveaway, et cetera. We wanted to make sure that students are paid for their work and centered. And we prioritize also for our own employees, taking time off, practicing self-care, offering healing modalities like sound healing, and focus really on this kind of creative work environment that supported holistic well-being. With this opportunity to kind of have more flexibility, autonomy, a different form of communication, and this kind of supportive self-time, it was definitely an opportunity for us to reconnect with this work and to partner with campus partners, maybe that we hadn't worked with, to build new relationships with departments or academic units, and even students, right? Student groups. So I focus a lot on undergraduate students, and that was a population that I really was intentful on reaching out to. And so some of the programs came from that. And while we're working remotely, we wanted to spend this time reflecting on how can we strategically plan and motivate and empower student communities to kind of recenter on themselves, self-care, and also prevention work and their own work-life balance. And so since the beginning of COVID, where we are now is we actually have returned to campus, although some employees were still working remotely, and we're kind of continuing to operate in this hybrid model for UC Berkeley. But we're continuing to center around health and safety needs of our communities and kind of strategizing the prevention needs of students to come and what may be in the future upcoming. So again, at the beginning of COVID, we shifted all of our educational workshops online. We were meeting with students one-on-one. We were holding focus groups, kind of reflection. But instead of just maybe offering those workshops, we wanted to start thinking about how do we shift in COVID and if we return to campus, or if this new fully remote is the new normal. So we built this program that you're kind of looking at, a model where student organizations, before we maybe just offer a workshop per se, we're holding an initial consultation, really to build relationship, to build trust with student organizations and leaders, and to discuss their organizational's mission, maybe previous prevention efforts or knowledge around resources, identifying maybe any problem areas that may exist, reviewing existing policy or constitutions that they may have in operation, and really exploring their own prevention goals. From that kind of initial consultation, or that we could hold virtually or now in person or a hybrid, our Path to Care students, the students that we employ in our office, after they met with the student organization and the student leadership, they'd come back and kind of offer this prevention plan or strategic approach to the organization. So in collaboration with the organization, they'll look at maybe, is there any data they could gather, prevention material, maybe such as a workshop or a session that they need to hold for their community. And how can we maybe tailor those sessions to meet the members of the organization and the community needs? And is that information data informed? Is it community involved? And are these prevention efforts supported by the organizations that we're serving? And so following kind of that prevention effort that's really customized and tailored to the community, our students debrief and reflect on the interactions. They debrief with the organization themselves, and they prepare actually a kind of a data enhanced report that shows the prevention goals and how the prevention strategy impacted the community or not. So hopefully we're seeing, if it's like a consent and boundaries workshop that's been tailored to a community, we're seeing in those data reports or reflective reports at the end, maybe an 80% increase of knowledge of how to uphold your own boundaries and how to respect boundaries of another individual. And we're continuing to kind of explore this collaborative effort that can be offered virtually, in person, or in a hybrid offering, to strengthen kind of that relationship with organizational leadership, with undergraduate students, with graduate students, and this allows us to kind of continuously check in and strengthen the relationships with students in holding accountability with their spaces. So that's one modality that we did. And if we go to another slide, I can talk to us about an undergraduate prevention toolkit. So another kind of COVID innovative program and effort is our undergraduate sexual violence and sexual harassment prevention toolkit. And so with this toolkit, we developed the approaches sociological that we introduced our office foundations on. It kind of goes back to beyond really the education of just an individual to look at how relationships, community norms and standards, institutional policies, and kind of broader societal values intersect with the problem of sexual violence. And how do we approach and encourage student organizations or undergraduate student communities or graduate professional communities to really think and plan accordingly? So with the COVID impact, we really had time to implement the undergrad prevention toolkit virtually, pilot this with students to utilize this as a framework so that student leaders could work in collection, in community, in developing trauma-informed violence prevention policies and guidelines for their own organizations. And we could help in coaching and consulting them to understand kind of the crucial role prevention plays with their communities, especially during COVID, right? And in the extreme circumstances there. And to help them assist in expanding their knowledge and understanding of community conditions, their needs, and resources. And then on the next slide, you'll see that the 6-section toolkit is kind of comprised of guiding questions and action items to formulate a list of recommendations into formal action steps. So this development allowed us to kind of continue consulting and building relationships with undergraduate students, registered student organizations, and defined communities that continue to kind of support and collaborate on primary prevention. And then the next slide, we actually work specifically with specific communities such as like Greeks or student athletes, where SVSH could show up much differently because it is a combined community of individuals. And so for Greeks, we wanted to create a framework of questions that Greek advisors, whether they're faculty, academics, or professional staff that are supporting Greek organizations, during COVID and continued as we've kind of navigated this new world of COVID, these set of questions they could use to debrief and reflect around prevention, maybe needs and resources of an organization, and how they could connect with their community on an ongoing basis with these small dose prevention messages. These tools really help students consider recruitment in this virtual or hybrid world, social events, practices of community and safety as they were navigating kind of a COVID impacted session. And then for our student athletes, we developed and piloted during COVID this first comprehensive collegiate training program, of course, inspired by our community partners, Futures Without Violence, incredible work with CBIM and AAL, which is a middle school and high school program focused on kind of using the power of coach influence in teams and that student athlete coach relationship to hold critical conversations. And so in partnership, we really, UC Berkeley looked at creating what is now called Coaching Athletes as Leaders. So a 12-week program that integrates values like teamwork, integrity, respect, and as a foundation to teach healthy relationships, leadership, and violence prevention skills. And this student athlete specific program was built originally to be held in person, but COVID assisted us in transitioning this program to be offered in fully remote, hybrid, or in person. And we developed a 2-part virtual training for coaches and athletic staff around the curriculum, guided them through the social justice foundations and how to facilitate these safe space discussions. And then as a center, as a Path to Care center, we then consulted to kind of build an implementation plan for each team. This kind of allows the coaches and the coaching staff to select topics in the themes around the 12-week program that they feel most comfortable facilitating the conversations with their student athletes, and we can support as a center or find outside support to facilitate other areas that they may not feel as comfortable. And we strategize which weeks also works best for the team to implement this conversation. So is it every other week? Is it once a week? But the goal was to make sure that these small dose conversations were happening continuously, regularly, and they almost became a normal part of a team. So whether that was during competition or during off season, we really worked in collaboration with the coach and the student athletic teams to build a schedule and a process that was natural and integrative to the athletic practices. And so the program is built also so that there's like a library of questions. So the coaches and the coaching staff can really choose which questions for which weeks they want to run with their team. And kind of on the current slide, you're looking at one of the week sessions for Language Matters, which is really centers around the importance of language, the use of language. And at the beginning of each week, the coaches can go through a 5-minute online refresher course to kind of get grounded in that week's topic and how to flow in that discussion. And then following kind of holding space for the student athletes to engage in these really critical, important conversations. There's some wrap up and key takeaways to kind of support the coach and kind of closing out and guiding that new positive norming session. And so, of course, our next steps as we're transitioning back to campus will be to develop an app, hopefully, to assist the coaches with accessibility of the program while they're traveling. So it could be done while they're on the airplane, while they're on a bus, while they're in a hotel, and it's really accessible to the team. And just really grateful to highlight our partners at Futures Without Violence and University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, UPMC, who UPMC led our evaluation of the first pilot series. And we're currently hoping to launch year 2 of the program with a new set of athletic teams. So more info to come, but that's one of the programs that we were able to expand during COVID. And lastly, I think I'll just end by saying, Tori, that we on the next slide just are kind of, these are our bullets as a kind of an outcome as a center. And as we're kind of continuing to transition into this new normal, we're definitely focused on centering and serving survivors and understanding that survivors are experiencing inundated forms of violence and lack of access to resources during this time. And so how can we hold that information and continue to work towards primary prevention in this kind of hybrid world that we're all experiencing in different ways, even on this call. And so for UC Berkeley, it's instrumental to really expand our campus partnerships. And what you're seeing here on the slides are some of our outcomes as a center that we're hoping to really mobilize and continue through for this academic year.
Wow, Mariana, the work that you all are doing is just so fascinating and impactful. And, folks in the chat are really appreciating the coaching athletes as leaders that you were sharing. One person did have a question, and I think it was related to the undergraduate sexual violence and sexual harassment prevention toolkit. Is that toolkit publicly available?
It will be soon. We're kind of working on a little bit of the branding and finalization of some of the tweaks for this semester. And I'll be working with Dr. Melissa Kwan, my supervisor, to kind of hopefully roll that out. But as a public institution, we're here to serve and contribute to the greater good and hopefully collectively share resources. So I would love to get that out to our colleagues on this call as well.
Great. Thank you, Mariana. So when that's available, we'll reconnect and find a way to get this information to our audience, and at the very least on this web conference's website page for folks to revisit. So that's super great to know, because that is a really powerful tool that you all are developing with how to not only just develop prevention on campus, but develop student leaders in prevention, and those student leaders in prevention then become adult leaders in prevention in workplaces, whether it's a workplace in sexual violence prevention, intimate partner violence prevention, or within other workplaces, or they become parents in prevention, or partners in prevention, or neighbors in prevention. So it's just really great to hear from both of you, how your prevention work doesn't just stop with what you give to the community, but how you develop your community to be champions in prevention too. So this has been a really inspiring conversation, and I'm really excited to move into our Q&A. But before we do that, we have a question for our audience. You've heard a lot from both Mariana and Hovhanna about a comprehensive approach to prevention. So what ways do you see a comprehensive prevention approach as a benefit to pivoting campus sexual and intimate partner violence prevention? We heard a lot from our guests today about how the COVID-19 pandemic has made, highlighted a lot of vulnerabilities and risk factors to experiencing violence. And so how can, taking a more comprehensive approach to prevention benefit some of that responsiveness that we're seeing come out of campus prevention work, responding to student and community needs? So thank you, Ashley, for pasting that question in the chat. Ashley, can I hand it over to you to start our Q&A with our guests?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a couple of questions that we want to pose to Hovhanna and Mariana, but we also want to invite you all in our audience to respond to these questions as well. If they speak to you, if you feel like you'd like to contribute to this next conversation. And so the first question that I'm going to pose to our guests, but also to you all in the audience, is I'm wondering, what are some ways that you and or your organizations are promoting healing, health, and wellness for folks who are doing prevention work? So Havana, Mariana, what are some ways that you all or your organizations are promoting healing, health, and wellness?
I can go first if you're cool with that. Okay. So I will have to shout out MOCA DSV because they have an amazing wellness program. So we are lucky enough to be able to have 8 hours of flex time that we can use for wellness, which, you know, with working remote is very valuable. It gives you time to go out for more than just a quick 30-minute break to, you know, soak in the air, get some sun, just to kind of walk around. But we have those 8 hours that do not affect like our PTO. It doesn't affect our sick time or our vacation time. So that's very impressive. And I've never worked at an organization that has offered that. So that's very important to me that that's implemented in my place of employment. And personally, I just try to make sure that I take that time out and do things just for me, even if it's just once the kids go to bed. Like at some point we've got to reset because this work is hard and it's exhausting. And when you add on like other layers of vicarious trauma that may be happening, being stuck at home, not knowing what's going on, and then, you know, worrying about your brown, indigenous, like BIPOC people, like it's very stressful personally. And we just try to remind like our preventionists, like when we have our meetings, like, hey, take time out for yourself. And we actually started implementing that in our monthly calls with our prevention specialists throughout the state of like, hey, what are you doing for yourself? Because we don't want them to get burned out. We want them to stay around, and we know how important it is to give, but you also have to give to yourself as well. So that's just some of the things we've been doing, and as an organization, and personally, I just try to make sure that I do make that time for myself, because if I'm not good to myself, then I'm not going to be good to anybody else.
Great, Havana. Yeah, we talked offline about this as well, but our center as well on UC Berkeley, we're really centering around these self-care days, these mental health days, these emotional wellness days. We don't necessarily have a set hours as structurally as Havana's partnership does, but for our center as well as for the campus, they're there and they're available, and we're asking people to take them. And so for my own staff, there's no questions asked. If you reach out and let me know, we're looking for coverage on the things that need coverage, so you can care. We don't need to know why, we don't need to know what's going on. We're here. You take the time that you need, no questions asked. And additionally, we're offering for our center, some trauma-informed yoga practices. We're doing sound healing. We're doing different healing modalities for our staff, for our students as well. We have a small healing garden within our office. So if you just need to go sit and enjoy that kind of energy of the earth and the plants around you, you can really use that to rejuvenate. And then just smaller things such as like, starting and ending meetings with a breathing activity, a ground in, a ground out, and not kind of getting in these back-to-back, just go, meeting after meeting. Hey, could that have just been an email, like type of modality or feel? We're really trying to be intentional with the spaces that we're sharing, the time that we are prioritizing, including if we're asking people to show up at a certain space. I think the COVID impacted world really showed us as an organization, we have to look at people holistically and who they are, what they're bringing to the table, what they have to navigate on their own time. So happy hours or social or events that we're requiring people to go to at 4 or 5 o'clock when people have kiddos to pick up and do the things may not be right. So thinking about that more holistic wellness, well-being is something we're doing. And we've also worked on flex scheduling. So we have some of my staff working 7 to 3, some may be working like an 11 to 6. So what operates best for them to achieve success and well-being in their life, both hybrid, remote, and fully returning to campus. And so we're really trying to stay dedicated to that flexibility and wellness as we're moving forward.
Thank you both for sharing examples of what you're doing, what your organizations are doing. In the chat, Hannah says at CSU Northridge, They're going to begin incorporating trauma-informed yoga. And then Dr. Chirlanda said, remember to get and maintain healthy sleep routines as part of comprehensive wellness. So I wanted to lift those two comments up. Gosh, okay, next question. What has kept you inspired and motivated over the last 19 months? And nothing is a perfectly acceptable answer as well.
Yeah, like it's been rough, right? It's been tough. There's no lie about it. Like it's been so much going on, and then trying to work and provide services and also show up for your kids that we're virtually learning. Like it's been tough, and that's my reason why, right? Like I want to ensure that this conversation keeps going, so that when they're in college and they're in high school, like that's a regular part of their conversation. Like they're going to be the bystander. They're going to one that's going to speak up, and they're the next generation. So although, you know, some subject matter should not be discussed around my 7 and 3-year-old, they still know the premise of like, hey, no means no, you ask before you do anything. So that is really what has kept me going on, that there is another generation that's coming up, and we want to make sure that the next generation is better and don't have to deal with the things that we may have dealt with, and, you know, just improving for everyone who's still yet to come. So that's kind of how I've kind of kept going on, just looking at them.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, both personally and professionally, it's the same for me. I think I have a, you know, 13-year-old young kid. I'm a single parent. And so watching, trying to model myself what respect and how to show up looks like, continuing to grow myself and really inspiring kind of that hope and that motivation, not only in my own family, my immediate family, but those populations around us. And then professionally, watching the students at UC Berkeley, watching the staff, watching the faculty challenge themselves to create better spaces, to really hear what prevention could look like integrated into their work, and to really kind of cultivate that culture of respect and consent that we want to see, regardless if they're engineers, they're the Haas Business School, you know, they're prevention practitioners, right? We have all accountability in this. And so I think the inspiration and motivation for me is the hope around that, seeing small steps of achievement, because I don't know about y'all, but I feel it's very hard to measure prevention sometimes. And so seeing those small wins, that small collaboration, hearing from communities, I felt heard, I felt seen, I felt included in this space, you know, and starting to get a sense that, you know, we're making some steps there, I think is really inspiring and motivating. And I hope that as we continue to grow out of these 18 last plus months or so, we really dedicate to really centering around people and who they are, how they show up, and what they need to thrive in spaces. And so I think that's really my motivation, is centering around that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for those answers. So the last question that I have is kind of like a visioning or dreaming question, and it's really about like what do we need to sustain ourselves, and not just ourselves but the future, the people who will come and be part of this work and movement after us. And so my question to you, Havana and Mariana, is if your dreams came true, what would a healing, healthy, and well prevention environment look like?
It would look like rainbows and a lot of brunches. No, just kidding. You know, it would look like us having this regular conversation, those layered messages, like, you know, what we're doing on several levels. If we can have that implemented everywhere and we're all understanding it, you know, it will make a great difference, right? Like understanding how important the inequities in health are, understanding the disparities, understanding the accessibility. Like there's so many different layers of what is misunderstood because some are at a place of privilege. But if everybody can just get on the same page and understand and be open to understanding, I think that that will make like a well prevention environment, will be health and equity across all spectrums, and not just for one, and easily accessible, because we have to think about like certain things are just accessible for more urban versus rural, so that's not fair to them as well. So, you know, we just kind of have to look at things from a holistic approach and make sure that our messaging is layered and is genuine. And some folks just, you know, don't want to understand it, and if they don't, then you can't make them understand it. So we've kind of got to do a better job about that. So that's kind of my hopes, along with a little brunch spot.
Yeah, Ivana, I think we're on the same page. I think for me, the thing I'll add is that to sustain, I think the next generation in this work, I think we need to expand it and pay them for their work in this, and pay them well. I'm a big advocate of pay equity when we have individuals doing prevention and response in this work. I also am trying to model for the students that are coming into this space, trying to not only build in stable funding, but also to build out programs that are sustainable, whether I'm running them in a prevention manager role as I serve now or not. How are we building community partnerships? How are we building long-lasting frameworks and structures that are involved, engaged at multiple intersections, so that they will continue to serve the communities and flow, and it's not going to break down if one or two people leave, et cetera. So I think taking that passion and individual drive that I've seen in prevention work so far, but integrating into the foundations of how, for me, UC Berkeley, or a large institution, works, and how do we kind of merge those two. And for sustaining self, I think it's a lot of healing work. It's a lot of taking care of yourself, making sure that you're grounded and you're in a good space, taking time, because for me, I watch the students watch me. So if I'm not taking care of self and I'm not taking care of others and I'm not doing the things, then I'm modeling that for them and what's acceptable to do, and to get on that line towards burnout. And so I think if dreams came true, I think we would center around the fact that healing should be at the front, self care should be at the front of our communities. We should center around Black, Brown women, Indigenous women, individuals that are experiencing and have experiencing the unmost touchable harm that we can imagine in this world, and that we're centering around building programs and supportive environments from those communities, that they're healthy in framework, they're inclusive in framework, it's not just westernized medicine practices of approaches, that we're inclusive of all operations, and that prevention is building from predicting what future harm and historical harm has done, and how is that impacting us right now. And so I think my dreams came true, we'd be really working kind of interconnectedly, whether it's law enforcement, community college, four-year school, community campus partner, healthcare system. I think we really need to break down some silos and connect and work towards understanding what's happening in this world, and it's not equitable at all. And so hopefully that's a helpful answer.
For sure. Thank you for sharing your dreams with us. Really appreciate that. And Tori, I want to pass it back to you to hear any reflections on your part.
Thanks, Ashley, and thank you, Mariana and Huvana. I love asking this question because I feel like it just ends us on such a hopeful note. And Huvana, I know you said like, oh, it would be a world of brunches. Just kidding. But I also think that like that joy that you brought into your, your vision and your hope for a healing, healthy, and well prevention environment is it's so energizing to like move forward with that joy. And so I really appreciate both of you bringing in what that looks like for you, and how we can model that and begin to model it today so that our future does look like that one day. There's a question from Dayanara in the chat that I think is so great. What steps do individuals need to take when trying to pursue a career that focuses on healing domestic and sexual violence victims? I heard from both of you so much about how, we need to care for ourselves so we care for others. So I wonder if there are any other, any other like tips or advice that you would have that would answer Dayanara's question.
Ivana, you want to go? You want me to start?
You could go first. I've been talking first a lot. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if you're asking directly like our own journey or not, Dayanara, but I would say, I think for me, there's a lot of personal connection to these works and topics. being a foster kid, kid that was all over the spot growing up in different environments, from Louisiana to Mississippi, North Carolina, West Virginia. I saw a lot. So I think I came in wanting to prevent that type of harm from happening to anybody else, and really bringing that interconnection. And I think the individuals I work with holding that information, knowing that a lot of us, regardless of who we're serving and the type of practitioner that we've done professionally, we have to realize that the majority of individuals have experienced some form of harm or are experiencing harm on a daily basis. And so my focus is really making sure that we're holding space for individuals and how they come in with different backgrounds, exploring what do I need to do to set up healthy environments that are not going to re-trigger and traumatize them. I don't need to know their story and their journey unless they want that shared so I can have a better understanding. But what I need to know is how do I make an environment that's going to support you, help breed love, inspiration, and involvement so you can grow into who you need to be, and that we, and myself and we as a center, don't create an area or environment of harm or continuous trauma or triggers. And so I think holding all that information, having open and transparent conversations with my staff, and communicating where their different background and journeys are coming from, and what does success look like for them, what do they need, is what I've done. I hope that was answering your question. I'm happy to correct myself if not. Havana, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I just echo what you said, Mariana. Like, it makes complete sense. Like, you have to really do your research and know the different backgrounds that you're dealing with, and be humble with it. Like, we don't know everything. Ask questions in a humbling way of wanting to know, the background and the journey that someone has had, and don't put your own biases on there. Yes, you have your experiences and that can be respected, but everybody's experience is a little bit different. So I just think that's really important, just to stay humble and come from a place of learning, because we're always needing to learn something from someone else, because what worked for one client we know won't work for somebody else. And just like Mariana, like, personal experience is what kind of brought me here, right? Like, I wanted to do something because it was something that I was missing at a certain point in time, and I'm still missing. I'm still learning as we go on, because things change and feelings change, and some things are triggering and some days are tougher than others. So just being open to learning and building good foundational relationships with people is really important, in the field and out the field, because folks out of the field may not always understand. And then sometimes you may not always want to talk about what's going on in the field. So having that support system is very, very valuable. I have learned that over the years. So, yep, never too old to stop learning. That's all I got, Tori.
Thank you both so much. I love that focus on, creating those environments where everyone can thrive. I feel like that's something that we all, no matter where we are in our journeys, have the capability of doing. So thank you both so much for all of the wisdom that you shared on this web conference today. We are at the end of our time together today. We did want to send our audience a couple of resources that we've recently done on Prevent Connect that are related to those health equity reports that Havana had talked about earlier in today's workshop, or in today's web conference. So you can find those linked in the chat. And this will conclude the web conference for today. Thank you so much, Mariana. Thank you, Havana. Thank you to my colleague, Ashley. Thank you to our captioners at Aberdeen Captioning, and thank you to our audience. It was so wonderful to connect with you all today. We really appreciate your presence and being here with all of us. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care, stay safe, and we will see you on the next Prevent Connect web conference.